Hi there, this is Simon from writtenlegalenglish.com and welcome to another video where we're going to be doing another plain English redraft. And in searching for things to redraft, this journey takes you into weird and wonderful places, and in this particular case, the text we're going to have a look at is in a funeral plan or a funeral director's terms and conditions. A strange place to find ambiguous text, but nonetheless, that's where we found it. And this is the text that we are going to work with. So the list is introduced with this sentence. You or your estate may have to pay additional sums to cover the following, and then there's a number of things, and this is one of the things in that list. Any additional costs incurred by the selected funeral director in relation to transport to and or from the place at which your funeral is carried out and or the place from which the body is collected, if these are more than 25 miles from the selected funeral director's premises. The exception to this is if you die away from home within the United Kingdom, see Section A, and I've included Section A here. If you die while away from home within the mainland UK, your funeral plan will cover the cost of taking the body to the selected funeral director's premises. In this particular text, I want to concentrate on these issues. I want to have a look at the sentence incurred by the selected funeral director. Andor, two examples of Andor, we've had a look at that before as well, and then we've got this phrase away from home. So let's get started. Okay, so let's start off with this sentence. You or your estate may have to pay additional sums to cover the following. Any additional costs incurred by the selected funeral director in relation to transport. What's the problem with this? Well, in my opinion, I think this is an unjustified use of the passive voice. If we expand this sentence out, it should say, or it might say, any additional costs that were incurred by the selected funeral director. And that's where the passive is hidden. So even though you can't see the form of the verb be, it is there in the sentence. So if we're going to use the passive, we have to remember there are 3 rules for using the passive, and we have to meet one of those. The first one is this: we don't know who the person is. We don't know the subject who is doing the verb. Clearly, we can see it's the selected funeral director. Number 2, and this is where it starts to get a little bit more subjective, is that we think we can use the passive if we think the action is more important than the person doing it. And here, you might disagree with me. You might think that additional costs being incurred as an action is more important than the person who is incurring those costs. I think differently. I think that it's more important to stress that someone incurs costs as opposed to the fact that costs were incurred and it seemed to affect someone who we find out who it is later on in the sentence. The third rule for using the passive justifiably is to create distance, and that context isn't here either. If you want to find out more about the passive, check out the video that I did about this years ago on the first version of my online course. I'll link you to it below this video. So here I think we can redraft this into the active voice and create a much stronger sentence. Any additional costs the selected funeral director incurs in relation to transport. So that's the first issue. The second issue is these Andors. Now, I've done videos on Andor before. It is a horrible term in English. It means nothing at all. It's been attacked by judges, by people who have to rely on contracts. You shouldn't use it. It is, in actual fact, a legal English mistake if you use Andor in your writing, because what does it mean? Well, let's find out. In relation to transport and or from the place, does this mean that it's impossible to incur costs going one way but not the other? I mean, that seems like a slightly ridiculous situation. We're going to charge you for going this way, but we're not going to charge you for coming back. It seems a little bit strange to me. And then you've got the second and/or, which is between the 2 points. So it's the place at which your funeral is carried out, or the place from which the body is collected, or is it and? So and doesn't make sense, I don't think, logically, but maybe there's something that I can't see there. So it's as if the drafter is a little bit confused, that the drafter is trying to cover all of the bases at once and says, okay, I'll just use and or because I think that gets me out of jail. But it doesn't. It just creates confusion, because then you're thinking, how do I understand this? what is the relationship? Is it one or the other? Is it both of them? I mean, how does it work? So what we've got to do here to solve this problem is to redraft. And one possible redraft that you can do is this, is to use tabulation and set out the points clearly. So you can say, in relation to transport to and from, now I'm going to assume, because it makes sense to do so, that you would charge costs for going both ways. So you go transport to and from, 1, the place at which the funeral is carried out, and, this is my interpretation, the place from which the body is collected. Now, I've put those square brackets there on purpose to separate out the 2 points, because the next thing that follows is if one or both of the places are more than 25 miles from. So I've added in a little bit of extra information in that conditional clause, just to stress that it's one or the other. And so this is how I redrafted it, so it made sense to me. But if you disagree with me, then leave a comment below, and I'd like to see how you redraft this or how you resolve this ambiguity which exists in the text. And the final thing I want to talk about, as we're talking about ambiguity, is this ambiguous phrase, die away from home. And you can see at the end here, it says the exception to this is if you die away from home within the United Kingdom, see section A, and then it says if you die away from home one more time. Now, this isn't a defined term, so we don't exactly know what away from home means, which allows us to potentially interpret it in different ways. So are we talking about going to the shops? Is this away from home? If unfortunately someone has a heart attack while they're doing their shopping, is that away from home? Or if someone's visiting their relatives in a different town, is that away from home? Is away from home going further than 25 miles? Because 25 miles is mentioned in the text, maybe that's a limit. I mean, exactly what does it mean away from home? And my advice to you is, as you're drafting, just to, in the redrafting process, see if you can identify potentially ambiguous phrases that need to be explained out. And it could be that you set limits somehow, 50 miles, 25 miles, whatever it might be. It could be that you say even 10 miles within your home address, for example. Something like that. So a clearer, more obvious limit for the reader to actually understand what it is that you're trying to communicate. But I would argue that away from home is ambiguous and it needs to be defined in a little bit more detail. Okay, some things to take away from that text. Don't use the passive unnecessarily, don't use Andor, and careful for potentially ambiguous phrases which make sense to you, but not to the reader who will be relying on those terms and conditions. If you like this video, make sure that you check out all of the other videos that I've got on my channel, where I also do other plain English redrafts of looking at various other different things, and make sure you subscribe to keep up to date with all of the new content that I post on my channel. And of course, if you want to practice and develop your legal English vocabulary skills, then head on over to my website. There's a link in the video description below to try out all my free legal English exercises. Okay, I'll see you again soon.